Hello, everybody. My name is Patrick Park. I am the guest lecturer for the next two, today and Thursday. I'll be doing a very quick introduction on social networks and social network analysis. I think it's a nice fit with this course on empirical methods because it's a very different way of looking at data, and it requires data sets that are quite different from the usual tabular data sets that are used a lot in empirical studies, where each row is a user or some individual, right? Okay. I want to start with the sort of orienting worldview in social networks. It takes a relational worldview, right? Now, we all have identities and conceptions about our selves, right? So who we are and how we are unique compared to others. That's sort of the individualist way of thinking about yourself or about the world. But there's an alternative way of thinking about yourself, which is in terms of relations. The relationships that you build or you hold, those are the things that define you. And so this relational worldview is not something new. It has been embedded in throughout history, and they typically and often show up as illustrations of trees, right? So if you look at artworks in history, they have family trees, they have relationships based on theology and saints and whatnot. There's another relational view of how people should be related to one another in terms of kinship. There are these rules that can be expressed in a tree, such as one that you see here. There's relational worldviews also embedded in more recent literatures and movies and cultural artifacts. One example being the X-Men family tree here, the movie X-Men. The connections represent many different types of relationships, from romantic relationships, genetic connections, and adversarial connections and whatnot. So this sort of relational way of looking at the world is quite powerful. And these connections or connection-centric views are also found in open source software collaborative collaborations, and you get this beautiful picture where each dot or node is a project, and they are connected. What was it? Yeah, connected through common collaborators or common developers between projects. Okay. And we have to talk about the origin of species, obviously. There is the family tree, or this, the diversification of life in terms of species. And this visualization, which was included in Charles Darwin's book, Origin of Species, is a very fitting sort of illustration of how different species kind of bifurcate and are related to one another. Okay. So social networks or network science in more general takes this relational view, but I'm going to focus more on the social aspect, the social networks. It is one way to, or a lens and a tool for understanding how social order is structured, how society is possible, right? We all, so you know, if we assume that everybody is egoistic and trying to maximize you know, benefits for themselves, then society isn't possible. It's going to be a war of all against all. But that's not the world we live in. We have social order. So where does that social order come from? One way to think about this or represent this is in terms of networks or relationships. And one of the early sociologists, Georg Simmel, was very influential in developing this sort of perspective about society, about groups, and you know, entities, social entities that transcend the individual. And he thought that society exists where a number of individuals enter into interaction, right? It's not just these atomized individuals kind of lumped together. That's not society. Society is where people or individuals come into interaction. So society lies in those connections. Again, the relational worldview. And he argued that order emerges from these the interaction patterns, right? The patterned interactions. Simmel was from the 19th century, well, late 19th to early 20th century, but his influence kind of really took off in this subdiscipline called sociometry, or a method called sociometry, which actually uses graph theory. So it's very mathematical and quantitative, uses graph theory and these visual tools to kind of represent and study little societies. So one example is this classroom friendship network, and how you probably already know what's coming, but so you have these circles nodes representing, I think it was female students, and then the male students on the left. They're all sort of interconnected in this middle school classroom, and these are all friendship ties. And you can see, as typical of middle school students, at least at that time, there were no interconnections between the boys and the girls. There was just one couple, I guess, that's holding these two groups together. So this immediately gives you a visual sort of description of the structure of the classroom, and how clustered the boys and girls are, and how they're not sort of interacting. So some basic assumptions about social network analysis. The most basic assumption, obviously, because it's taking a relational worldview, is that individuals are interdependent, right? What I do or my actions have repercussions to other people, and how I interact in this dyadic relationship between with another person has consequences outside of this direct relationship. So individuals are in that way interdependent. And social networks can reveal the structure of the lack there or the lack thereof in particular contexts by studying these patterned interactions and interdependencies. There is a slightly different sort of two different traditions in network science or disciplines that use the mathematical tools of or graph theory as mathematical tools for representing networks. I've been talking about the social network analysis perspective or tradition. Again, going back to Georg Simmel in the 19th century and the developments there. It's primarily within the social sciences that social network analysis developed. But there's another important sort of stream or body of research that uses graph theory, and this is network science, primarily developed by physicists and people in statistical mechanics. And they use networks for a very slightly different objective in mind. So the common sort of theoretical interests that social network analysis and network science by the physicists and natural scientists have, the commonality is the interest in quantifying this abstract notion of structure, right? Patterned interactions or connections in a given system. But beyond that interest in structure, what social network analysts and network scientists focus on are quite different if you look into it. So for social network analysts, we're interested in how all sorts of social inequality can emerge from the resources or the capital that people can sort of garner and use, the capital that comes from relationships between people. So, for example, if you know somebody who's very powerful, that's sort of a relational or a social capital, right? You can utilize that relationship to towards benefiting yourself or for whatever objective, right? And there will be these inequalities because not everybody is connected to the most powerful person, right? So that the inequality aspect is something that social network analysts care about. So it's about distribution, right? Distribution of resources. The network scientists are interested in, that kind of distribution, right? Who's connected to whom, like how many connections do people have or the nodes have, and how are they distributed? But it's more sort of the approach is more sort of trying to characterize the distribution itself rather than looking into the sources of inequality that is inherent in such distributions. Okay. Both approaches are interested in kind of finding groups or patterned connections among a subset of people or nodes. They have different different names like subgroups versus modular communities, but the idea is the same. Can you kind of infer a group out of just the connections without knowing all these labels of the nodes or characteristics of the nodes? And another example is about social cohesion, right? For all sorts of social and political reasons, we want to have a cohesive society. How does that cohesive society look like? And how can we arrive to something like that in network terms? Now, the network scientists are also kind of interested in a similar thing, but it's more in terms of robustness of the network. Like if there is, for example, some attack on a power grid, what's the weakest kind of link? and how do you make the power grid system or the entire network more robust, right? So cohesion, robustness, similar concepts, but slightly different focuses. Another very important distinction, which kind of summarizes what I've been talking about, is the focus. Is the sort of objective to find universal laws that govern networks and how networks form. That's the interests of network scientists and physicists versus the variations in the structures that you might find from one context or one society to another. That's the interest of the social network analysts. So again, right, physics, what's the universal law of physics? What are the commonalities that kind of that are found in all sorts of different types of networks, from brain neuronal networks, food chains, power grids, communication networks, and friendship networks, and so on. So across all these different kinds of networks, what are the common sort of patterns that you observe? That's the sort of style of questions that network scientists ask. The social network analyst would rather try to focus in on the variation. Why is this network different in terms of its structure compared to this other network, right? What differentiates them, and what are the sort of social factors that give rise to this variation?
Actually, good question.
Sure.
What about difference in dynamics?
Difference in dynamics. Can you elaborate?
So on the previous, so here you're interested in difference between the structure. Because I guess I'm making an assumption that when you say structure, that it's static, that you're talking about a snapshot of the social network at a point in time.
Yeah.
So, but there's also these laws, that networks change, right? So what about differences in how they change?
Right. So the dynamics of, or the changes in network structures.
I guess I'm asking, do people study?
Yeah, all the time. Like Kathleen Carley in our department, she's the go-to person for dynamic, network analysis. A lot of her work is about the changes, how networks change over time and things like that. So that the change, the dynamics is an interest that both traditions hold, for sure. Now, let's see, what would be a good example? Yeah, power law degree distribution. So that's something that's been studied and researched very heavily over the years by network scientists. Let's say you have a network, there's a node with a lot of connections. We call that high degree, right? This is the popular kid, so to speak. And then there are a lot of people who have maybe one or two friends. So the x-axis is degree, i.e. number of connections, and this is the probability. Now, what network scientists have very consistently found was that a lot of different network systems, whether we're talking about the power grid or movie star networks like actor networks, social networks, or airport to airport flight networks, all sorts of networks, there's this very skewed degree distribution with a very long tail. So the vast majority of nodes in these networks vast majority, they have very few connections. And like almost impossibly few nodes have extremely high degree, a lot of connections. And when you sort of estimate or fit this curve, it's often power law distributed. So then the question is, well, the network scientists found something that's kind of general across all these different systems. What explains that? One very early and prominent explanation was based on this dynamic view, trying to model how newcomers select connections, right? And this is called the preferential attachment model, which is simply that the newcomers, let's say, new people who come to this, join the system, they have a finite number of connections that they can make. Let's just say there's some cost to making connections. If we assume that these newcomers prefer to connect to the more popular people or the nodes that have more higher degree, then over time, this is the sort of distribution you're going to end up with, right? So it's a dynamic model of trying to explain a static structure or a aggregated, time aggregated structure. So yeah, the dynamics play a very important role. For the social network analysts, the dynamics of connections is also quite important because let's say, for example, if you're thinking about political polarization, what is political polarization? It's this kind of bifurcation of opinions, right? But it also kind of goes hand in hand with the bifurcation of connections, just like you saw in here, right? This is just a middle school network, but a friendship network, but you get the idea, right? You have the political left and the political right. They're not talking to each other. They're like filter bubbles and all sorts of barriers that in the end kind of make it hard for people to kind of converse or communicate across these divisions. So how do you end up with this kind of division? One might ask. That's what social network analysts have asked in the past, and trying to find or develop a model based on some assumptions how the dynamics of interactions or opinion dynamics can lead to this kind of polarization. So yeah, very good question. Do you have any other questions? Yeah.
So is there anything about political, it's like in the topic of political polarization, is there any like kind of universally accepted mechanism about how that may occur in social networks? Like similar to the preferential attachment theory that is kind of more general and applies to all kinds of networks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, great question. There can be many different explanations for why a society polarizes over time, right? And this can be kind of looked from the lens of like, how do like generations change of like the distribution of opinions change over generations, right? But so there can be many different explanations is I guess what I'm trying to say. And obviously there is a social network dynamic-based explanation for several of them. One common thread or theme is homophily and social influence. So homophily is the tendency for people to befriend or connect with other people who are similar to themselves. either, in terms of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, nationality, language, whatever. People just feel more comfortable when they're around other people who are similar to themselves on, some social dimension. So that's homophily. Birds of a feather flock together. And then there's also social influence that operates in these contexts. So when two people talk to each other, they're kind of mutually influencing each other. So the more they talk, the more they discuss, it's likely that they will come to their opinions might converge a little bit more closer, right? And to the extent that those two people are similar, they're going to they're going to influence each other even more, and so their opinions will look even more similar. So there's this sort of feedback loop where homophily, the similarities between people, the homophily begets social influence, right? There's stronger influence between those who are similar. And when they influence each other more, they become even more similar, which kind of feeds into homophily. So there's this sort of positive feedback loop that social network analysts and opinion dynamics researchers have kind of looked into. And when you actually simulate those processes, you end up with this polarized network where there's a lot of connections within a group, and then a lot of connections in another group, but there are no connections. They're just maximally similar within, and there's no similarity between. And interestingly, to model this, they use physics models like icing models and what is it? I'm blinking on the name. Hopfield models, and they surprisingly really apply well to understand and model these social processes. All right.
It looks like the same mechanism will still holds like pre-social media age when people does not have any social media.
Mm-hmm.
So why is the polarization happening at this time? Is it because like the network will inevitably polarize, but the old networks does not evolve as fast as the social network today?
Yeah, great question. That's actually a paper that I'm working on right now. That exact question. Society as a whole, or if you look at offline opinion distributions, it's not as polarized as you might find in social media, right? And mostly when we talk about polarization, we're talking about Facebook, Twitter, and these social media platforms. That's where our observations lie. So one explanation. So my explanation is that the online environment where you can see everything that your friends are doing. Let's say on Twitter, if you're following a friend, you can see that friend at mentioning and conversing with some group of friends of that person. I can see all of those, right? So there's really not so much context separation, right? I mean, that friend might be talking to college buddies. I know this is my friend from like high school, right? And so I don't share that context, and yet I can see what's going on. So I might misinterpret because I'm not like part of the group. I don't share the assumptions or norms or those kinds of things that we implicitly use to sort of decode and make sense of what other people in the group are saying. Right, so it's called context collapse. you have all the context kind of collapse and, it's just one big jumble. Now, in that kind of environment, when you say something that makes perfectly, perfect sense in one group, might be offensive to another group, right? And the probability that you'll encounter that kind of situation is going to increase as you have more diverse group of friends, right? If all of your friends are kind of from one group, it doesn't happen that often. But with a diverse group of friends, a diverse network, you're going to see more of those collisions that occur. Right? So then the natural response is for the people with diverse networks to kind of self-censor themselves. They will talk about, I guess, neutral subjects. They will probably not reveal their true political beliefs on Twitter as much compared to those who have a more sort of partisan view and have a more closed similar network, right? Less diversity. So then if the people with diverse networks, and they tend to be the political moderates, when they self-censor, what people actually observe or come across will be disproportionately more partisan, stronger and more extreme opinions. And so you might observe a more sort of polarized, bifurcated opinion distribution. Yeah, that's just my study. And there are many other approaches and models that try to explain the sort of discrepancy between opinion polarization that we observe from surveys and offline surveys and whatnot versus what we observe in social media. So any other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
You're saying would appear more partisan because it's missing the nuance that would maybe bring their arguments to the center. I actually, when you said it would appear more partisan, I'm surprised that you. I didn't quite understand why. People's. Because people are trying to say things so that it's not offensive, you would think it would be pulling to the center, less the polar to the poles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get hung up on.
No. It's a good question. So if you assume that people with diverse networks, they will probably have more of these potential conflicts, right? They tend to be more politically moderate. Now, think about it, like a political moderate has friends on both sides of the aisle, right? So they have more diverse networks. And so to avoid conflict, I mean, this person might lean a little bit more left or right, right? But they're not going to express themselves as often or as frequently as those who are at the extremes.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that
seems to be a different argument. That makes sense.
It seems like a different argument.
Well, it just seemed like it was different from what you were saying before. But okay, I guess I just didn't understand what you were saying.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's so I guess I should have first, talked about that assumption that people with diverse networks, they tend to be more politically moderate. And so when they self-censor, the middle kind of falls out. And then you're observing this bimodal distribution of opinion.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. I didn't pick up on it. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was actually talking about this this working paper right before I got here, so that's why it's up. Okay. Any other questions? Thoughts? No? All right. Okay. So just kind of illustrating the point I was making, the contrast between social network analysis and network science. So Albert Laszlo Barabasi, he's a one of the important figures in modern network science research. And according to him, the whole point of network science is to find these organizing principles, the same types of kinds of organizing principles or mechanisms that govern the shape or the structure of networks, right? So again, universality is what what's underlying, this quote. On the other hand, we have Linton Freeman here. He was very influential in the early days of network analysis, social network analysis. And according to him, network analysts seek to uncover various kinds of patterns. And they try to determine the conditions under which those patterns arise and to discover their consequences, right? So again, this kind of stems from the social scientists' interest in trying to understand inequality, understand why there are different life trajectories or outcomes from one individual to another, right? So then the importance of context, you can imagine that it's elevated, and so that naturally, the social network analyst is interested in variation rather than universal laws. Okay. Another way to think about or describe what social network analysis aims for is to kind of contrast it to machine learning, right? And to put it really crudely or simply, it's the contrast or difference between explanation versus prediction, right? The beta hat versus the y hat. Social network analysts, as with any other scientists, are trying to explain why something happens. Why do we find certain network structures? Why do certain network structures lead to individual outcomes in this or that way, right? We're trying to explain. And so in terms of like, regression framework, it's paying attention to the beta hats, right? The predictions, predictions of the estimates, whereas in machine learning, it's not geared so much towards trying to explain something puzzling. It's more about prediction. It's very practical and application focused discipline, right? So predicting what people actually do, or predicting which two people will form a tie or a friendship tie in the future, like those kinds of predictions are more important than trying to explain or understand what's going on. So the machine learning expert might have these kinds of questions. How can I increase predictive accuracy on connections between nodes, right? So that's edge prediction. How can I leverage network information for downstream prediction tasks? And these are things like movie recommendations or what to show to the users of Pinterest and whatnot. So these are the node level prediction tasks that can use the network information from the connections of people. Whereas social network analysts would typically ask, what are the mechanisms that generate the connections between nodes? Yeah.
The network science also kind of explanation.
Yes, network science is, in my opinion, primarily, geared towards explanation, but with a different focus, right? Why do we keep finding this in food, food chains or food webs, friendship networks, and so on and so forth? So that universality, how do you explain that, right? Good question. Any other questions? Right. So, obviously, machine learning models are the benchmark, or the sort of success depends on how accurately you can make predictions. And so it's kind of the race to the top, right? Typically not a very theoretical. We're trying to use theory to make predictions, whatever you can, well, I take that back. Yeah, there are implicit theories that go into some machine learning models, especially the ones that are supervised. So you engineer these features from the network and use those for prediction tasks and whatnot. When you do that, there typically, or in many cases, there are some notions of mechanisms that are sort of encoded in the features that you engineer. But less emphasis on interpretation and theory. Social network analysis models, again, interpretability is kind of more important than making accurate predictions about what people will do next. Yeah.
How can we check the interpretability in the social network analysis model? I mean, the accuracy is easy to check because you can get a number, and there will be many explanations, and it might be there are several explanations, both seem reasonable, and how to pick up one.
That's yeah, that's, I guess, how science works, right? You have different explanations, different theories, and in the ideal scenario, you have some observed data, and you can pit these, explanations against each other, and see what the data tells you, which one is more plausible, right? That kind of setup. And then it's also like a continued process, like at a longer time scale, right? You might have these individual studies that kind of say this theory or explanation is more plausible, right? But then there could be subsequent studies that say, no, this is more plausible, and that kind of debate. It's just a normal like scientific process. Yeah. Right. Now, for illustrative purposes, I was kind of contrasting social network analysis and machine learning in terms of explanation and prediction, right? But in more recent years, there's been this sort of convergence and trying to kind of benefit from the other approach, and this happens from both sides. So, and I guess some of you will be familiar with this movement of trying to be able to explain the outcomes or the predictions that these black box models might spit out. And it kind of stems from a very practical problem, namely there are these all sorts of, social biases that kind of creep into the machine learning models that you create, because the data generation process itself is biased, right? So consequently, there are ethical issues that arise when you train your model based on biased data, and you use those predictions for certain purposes, like deciding how much to loan to people, or who to select in a like competitive process, or and things like that. And so all these explainable AI, or ethical AI, they all kind of touch on this idea of having to explain. You need to have some notion of explanation why you're getting these results, or else it can cause social issues, right? So explanation is kind of seeping into machine learning in that way. But if you look at it from the other end, from the social network analysis perspective, the beta hats that social network analysis cares about, they may be confirming a certain explanation or a model, right? But they're not really predictive oftentimes, right? So there's that question of, okay, if you can't really predict what's going to happen, then is this really a valid explanation or an understanding of how things work? If you understand how things work, then you should be able to predict with some reliability, right? But that wasn't, usually how social network analysts approach this problem. So if you have a beta hat that is in the direction that you hypothesize, and if it's significant, then your data sort of agrees with the theory that you set out to test. But the real world utility of that kind of approach is fairly low, because it's kind of useless in terms of making decisions or predicting, right? So the rationale that's kind of developing nowadays is that you should be able to use the prediction accuracy as a yardstick for judging your theory or explanation, right? So again, like it's happening from both directions, this sort of fusion of approaches.
I'm seeing something like some similar trend happening in the field of AI interpretability. Like there's some people arguing that it makes much more sense to design models that are inherently interpretable if you want to have the model applied in critical scenarios. And like it's more like I feel like there's no fundamental differences in the evaluation of model quality between social network analysis and machine learning, but it's more like for most of the machine learning methods we have in mind, they are inherently designed to fit arbitrary functions, and like without some hypothesis or assumptions, like without the assumption about the specific problem. But for if you want to do any kind of real explanations, you want to have a model that you have a theory in mind about how the prediction might work, and design a model that is particularly fitted to a theory. And I think this is the fundamental difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And but I think again, like the interpretability is in some sense tapping into this notion of explainability or explanations. What you just said reminded me of something. What was it? Oh, there are also approaches, and this is not necessarily about networks, but trying to kind of fuse explanation and prediction, because modern machine learning models can make such accurate predictions. You can kind of use that as your benchmark, and then you have a separate model, like the theory-driven or a simple model that you have like explanations as to how this works, and you sort of try to add and elaborate your model with additional explanations or assumptions, such that the prediction accuracy comes closer to that like all-encompassing black box model, right? So it's kind of like it's an interesting idea, I think. You're taking the black box model as reflecting reality, and rather than actually, looking at reality, it's the black box model.
The shortcut, because the black box model is designed to fit arbitrary functions, and you do not need to have an understanding what that function actually is.
Yeah.
So you have a method to fit it.
Yeah, and that's arbitrary and just so complicated, like so many parameters. And it's just, yeah. Does anybody work in like AI, machine learning, or have experience? Yeah.
I know how to code it.
What did you work on? Image processing. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The neural network models in machine learning that use like graphs, like graph neural network models. They take inspiration directly from those machine learning models developed from image processing and detection. Actually, Serena Chang, have you heard of that name? She was here yesterday as a job candidate, not in our department, but she does a lot of those like graph neural network models, and I wanted to attend her talk, but couldn't really do that. Anyway, so yeah, there are these network or graph-based models that kind of take the scaffolding of more widely used machine learning models in other areas. All right. See, where am I? Okay. Social context. Again, social network analysis cares about context and draws from the contextual characteristics to explain social outcomes or outcomes that pertain to the network. So when you care about the social context, naturally what you ask is, what are the nodes? Are these people? If they're people, then what kind of people are they? In what context are we observing these people, right? So there's a much richer and deep kind of interest about what the nodes are. And then naturally then, because we're taking a relational worldview, what's the nature of the tie or the edge between the nodes, right? Is it adversarial? Is it friendly? Is it based on exchange and so on? So the type of the tie becomes something that people care about a lot. And then lastly, how does the system self-organize to produce order, right? In this particular context. So yeah, there's that focus on social context, and then the meaning and nature of the tie. How do you interpret the meaning of a relationship, for example? And so in social network analysis, there are a lot of different types of ties that researchers have used to construct and analyze. Some classes, one is ties are based on similarity. So if you and I are in the same location, right, similar location, spatial, proximity, that could be counted as a tie in a network sense. Common membership, right? If we go to the same club, then we're sort of bound by its common focus of interest or group. Similar attributes. So if we both like playing video games, then that's a similarity in terms of interest and attribute. And so that could be used as a definition of a tie. Right? So that's similarity. Social relations. This is a lot of sociology here. Kinship ties, right? A is mother of B. B is brother of C, and so on. Those kinship ties. But there can be arbitrarily many roles, friendships, or A is the boss of B, right? In a work context, student and teacher relationships, or colleagues, competitors, right? Those are all social roles. Affective. Does A like B? Who does B like? B likes C, D, and E, but doesn't like A. So then A and B relationship is kind of hierarchical in some ways, because A favors B, but B doesn't reciprocate, right? So those kind of affective relationships. And then lastly, cognitive. So even if you don't have a direct tie with somebody, you can construct networks where the ties are exclusively about cognition. Does A know B or know of B? Or does A know whether B and C are connected or not? These are all about cognitions, and you can construct social networks from that. And then interactions, these are actual behaviors. You're constructing a network based on the behaviors or actions that people take. A has sex with B, A talks to B, giving advice, right? Advice giving relationships, help or harm, right? Adversarial. And then there are also network ties based on flows. So if you think about Twitter, if you follow somebody, then you might not necessarily know that person or on a personal basis, but there's still information that is transmitted through that following relationship, right? I tweet about something and it shows up in your timeline. So information flows, flows of beliefs, and social influence. We talked about that, how beliefs change, or how one belief gets transmitted from one person to another, and so on. So those are flows, right? And to contrast this to network science, there isn't really this rich notion of different types of ties. Like network scientists do work with network data sets that where the ties are defined in these ways. But again, it's about universal patterns that they're interested in. Usually, the questions they ask are such. Okay. So once you start thinking about social context, it's about how the situation creates these conditions and shapes how people or these nodes interact with one another. So one example would be dominance orders. You've heard of pecking order, right? It's actually chickens pecking one another, and it kind of shows the status of the chickens in that group. And monkeys grooming relationships are also based on hierarchy. So these different groomings or peckings, those activities already encode this notion of a hierarchy when you construct a network based on that. And these dominance orders can be more formalized in a group of 3 nodes. So we call these triads. So imagine that you have, okay, A, B, and C. A pays deference to B pays deference to C. Then if this triad is transitive, then A should pay deference to C. So you have these different directions of the arrows, and they hold that meaning of hierarchical order, right? Now, when you have 3 nodes and the ties or the edges are directed like this, you can have these 16 different constellations or combinations, right? And they all have slightly different interpretations in terms of the social. So one example is that the transitivity is a hierarchy. Like if you find a lot of these transitive triads in a system, it implies that or suggests that system is very hierarchical. If you don't find something like this a lot in a system, so for example, where's the cycle? Now, here's a cycle. So A pays deference to B, B pays to C, and C pays to A. So this isn't really hierarchical. It's circular. It's sort of egalitarian. So if you find less of those and you find these with higher frequency in a given social network, then you can conclude that this is probably more egalitarian. Right? And so when you look at the distributions of these different constellations, these different triadic patterns, you can start making inferences and comparing different networks. Right? Again, thinking about social context and variation. Right? Sorry, yeah. Is there any questions about this? By the way, this is called the triadic census here. These are all the possible constellations with 3 nodes and directed edges. So when you count the number of these different types of triads in a network for all of them, then you have a census, basically. So that's why it's called a triadic census. Okay. Another reason why we care about context and the nature of the tie is found in these exchange networks, right? So when we think about Facebook friendships, it's just like this sort of declaration that 2 people are friends, whatever that means on Facebook. But going beyond that kind of declaration, if you imagine that the interactions are some sort of an exchange, right? It could be exchanges of compliments. It could be just exchange of information. But if you take that exchange point of view and kind of overlay that on networks, then you get an exchange network. But the types of ties that are viewed in this kind of an exchange network might represent different opportunity structures, right? So for example, if I have a lot of exchange partners, then I have more power, right, to pick one partner, exchange partner for certain purposes, right? I have basically bargaining power in an exchange network, which is a very different way of thinking about network ties than when you're dealing with like a Facebook friendship network. The more friends you have, it's the relationships that you form in a friendship network are not as sort of exclusive or zero sum as in an exchange network, right? And again, that kind of illustrates the point of different having to pay attention to the social context. To kind of elaborate on what I was talking about, you can have an exchange network where the ties are either positive or negative. In a positively connected network, the exchange or interactions that happen between two people are contingent on the successful exchange or interactions with the others, right? So if you think of this as a supply chain, right? Actor A needs to successfully exchange with actor B, right? Let's say this is like a commodity provider. This is manufacturer. Right? Only then can actor C purchase or purchase the goods that actor A manufactures, right? Again, the successful exchange in one relation is contingent on the success of the neighboring relations. That's positive connection. A negative connection is, again, like when it's zero sum, basically. If A exchanges with B, that means that C does not have the opportunity to exchange with A, right? And this is what happens a lot in markets, but also in less formalized social, exchanges as well. And when you have that kind of negative connection, the sort of measures that you use for social network analysis can become obsolete or irrelevant rather. And this is one example. Okay, so for a network with negative connections, the sort of imbalance in the amount of dependence that two actors have to each other is equivalent to the amount of power that one has over the other, right? So if I depend on you a lot, that means you have more power over me, right? Yeah. So that's the power dependence theory in an exchange context, again, with negative connections. And so in this kind of a network, the most important people in the exchange network might not be the person who has the most connections, right? Here's an example. So let's say, Yeah, let's start here. So here are four people. There's a person A in the center, and three other people in these different positions. And the ties here represents the exchange relations, right? So, for example, A and B, they're all like in this experimental setup, right? A can choose from B1, B2, and B3 who to partner with to like do business in a given round, right? So you have multiple rounds. At each round, these people have to make the choice of just picking one person to exchange, and that's going to lead to benefits in terms of so measured in scores. So the whole objective here is to maximize the scores. The solid lines represent the more resource-rich relationships. So in a solid line relationship, there's 24 points that the two parties have to negotiate and divide. Right. So, for example, A can negotiate with B1, asking for like 20 points. Then B1 can put in a counter offer, or in the end just not exchange with A. So these are the more resource-rich connections, as shown as solid lines. The dashed lines are the relationships or the exchange ties with less resources. Only 8 points can be distributed between two people with the dashed line, right? So in this case, after, let's say, 50 rounds of exchanges, who would have had garnered the most points? A. Why A?
Each change, the A need more resource, the solid line of resource. The A has the most the solid.
Right. Yeah, so A has like equally resource-rich opportunities, whereas all the other partners don't really have that. So B3's alternative to exchanging with A is trying to divide a smaller pot with either B2 or B1. Right? And so that means that A has more negotiation power than B1, B2, or B3. What about here in this case? They would all have the same, right? More or less. What about here? B1 seems to be the most central in the sense that B1 has these connections in two directions. At the tail end, F1 and F2 are connected, but they have a dashed line. So in some ways, you can argue that D1 is the most central. Who do you think will gain the most in this configuration?
You will need to.
E1, E2. Why is that?
Well, I'm just guessing because I imagine F1 and F2 would want to trade more with E1 and E2 other than each other. So E1 and E2 might get a little bit more of the pot than D1 would. But your reaction makes me think that's not true.
Any other thoughts, guesses? You're in fact right. When you actually do this experimentally with college kids, the E1 and E2s, those come out with the highest points, even higher than D1, and this is why. So as you said, F2 and F1 would each rather exchange with E2 or E1, right? Because it's a larger pot. That means that E2 has bargaining power over F2 and F1. Now, if you think about D1, yeah, D1 has solid lines, meaning these resource-rich connections with two alters. But both of them have more bargaining power. They each have bargaining power over a weaker a partner, exchange partner. And so if D1 doesn't like the terms that D1 proposes, then E1 would rather just go and exchange with F1. Right? Same here between D1 and D2. Right? So effectively, even though D1 is the most central in this network, the most powerful ones are E1 and E2. Similar logic with these more complex configurations. Let's see. I think we're almost out of time. I still have a lot to. Okay, I'll just finish with the following point. Okay, so if you think about friendship networks, again, the highest degree node, this is the most central node, reap the most benefits, right? You gain a lot of information from different directions, from different kinds of people, and so there's like a vision advantage and arbitrage opportunities that the person with the most ties has, the most central node has. But in an exchange context where the connections are negative, the most central player is not necessarily the most powerful. So this is an illustration of why you want to pay attention to the first of all, the social context, and second, the type of tie, the nature of the tie in these networks, right? Without having that kind of notion, if you use like a network metric that counts the number of ties that each node has and uses that as like a power or status measure, it doesn't work in this situation. All right. I guess I'll continue on Thursday with some visualizations. Are there any questions? No. All right. Well, thank you. I'll see you on Thursday.